And we're back. I'm Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems. With me, of course, is Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute.
Our beliefs create our internal operating system, how we act, when we are silent, and when we don't take action. This process defines our truths, gives us confidence, and delivers our results. Do we believe we deserve better results? Learn how powerful thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs are every day of our life. So make sure your earbuds are firmly in place as Bill and I discuss believing works when you're involved in the believing and much more on episode 423 of Get in the Door podcast.
Well, here we are on Chapter 6 of The Challenger Sale, Taking Control of the Customer Conversation by Matthew Dixon and Brent Adamson. Chapter 6 is called Tailoring for Resonance. And I did like this chapter. What they're talking about in this chapter overall is how do we communicate a different message to the different stakeholders that are involved in the sales process. Now, they do start with about the first 5 pages of proof from the survey that they did, and obviously they did an extensive survey, and we can learn a lot from that. I certainly don't have the cash to go out and do a survey, so we can learn from the money that they spent doing this survey. And a couple of the big things they talked about in this, Scott. One, the key factor for the decision maker, and I think they're talking about the C-suite in many cases, or the highest level of person here, is that they want to make sure that the company they're doing business with has widespread support through the organization. So what that means that as a salesperson, you've got to go and sell to a larger number of stakeholders perhaps than you used to. You couldn't go right to the decision maker and say, here's our product, and they would say, good. They want to get people involved, and they really don't want to do all the work themselves anymore. So they're letting their key people, their key stakeholders, have a big part in the decision making, and then I think they want that decision laid on their desk, something they can just go forward with.
Yeah, involving other people in the organization. And it really works both ways on how they buy. The stakeholders are looking at a sales rep and they want to work with somebody who's professional, someone they can trust and that's going to deliver on what they say, and a rep who offers useful perspectives and educates the customer. And I found a very interesting line in there is that customers value how you sell, not what you sell. And I found that to be really interesting as to how the key decision makers are really evaluating the experience with a salesperson. So it's not always necessarily about the solution or the product, but it's more of the process that the sales rep goes through. And just like salespeople want to work with stakeholders that have buy-in across all areas, the stakeholders want to look at a salesperson that's professional and is able to commit and follow through and deliver on what they say too. So I found that to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think they want a partner. I think they want somebody they can work with long-term. One of the things I've seen in other studies is customers are reluctant to change suppliers. So they want to work with somebody that they feel they can trust, that they don't have to go check all the information that they're being given, and that they will be partnering with them and giving them a good, solid return on investment for the relationship.
Yeah, and there's a couple of great illustrations in this chapter that I think we need to refer. And as I go back to it and I go, gosh, I kind of forgot about that one. That's really powerful as to how they evaluate and how they, lay something out. So one of them is the new physics of sales, which is traditional versus emerging. And the emerging is how a rep talks with the customer stakeholders, and then the stakeholders communicate to the decision maker, versus traditional, it used to be the sales rep would talk to the decision maker, and the decision maker would then involve some of the other key stakeholders,
right,
and they would really take on all the responsibility. And now company leaders are really looking at their team to go, what do you want to do?
Yep.
What should we do? I want to get you involved in making them.
Well, I think we've always made a mistake of thinking that internally in a company they communicate well. I've seen salespeople that talk to a lot of stakeholders, but then they never go to the decision maker and make that decision maker part of the process, and they hope that the stakeholders will carry the water for them.
Yeah,
that's
right.
a big mistake as well, right? In this model, they're talking about involving the stakeholders, but the salesperson still has to go up to that decision maker and pull all that information together for them, not assuming that those stakeholders went to the decision maker and said, boy, we really want to go with Bill or Scott or whoever
Right.
with their program. Instead, the salesperson's got to carry that water up and bring that decision to the decision maker.
Right. Yeah. Interesting illustration is the knowledge and information. So the rep gives knowledge to the company stakeholders, and the company stakeholders give information to the rep. And I thought, wow, that is a really good example of how a conversation should go. And then the stakeholders then share that information and knowledge with the decision maker. So it's a really good illustration.
So let's get into how they want to tailor the message and how that tailoring happens, because I think that's really the gut. So you know, the early part was justification. This is, we need to tailor the message different to each stakeholder. And I think that this can become a complex process. The key was really that a lot of this tailoring is done on an organizational level, not just left up to each individual salesperson. So again, we need to work with marketing. We need to work as a sales team to develop a message tailored to the obvious stakeholders that we deal with in our type of industry, whether it's manufacturing or information management or whoever our stakeholders are. We need to know them and then tailor the message to them individually.
Yeah, and I think we covered something like this in a previous podcast with the different positions within a company and how a decision is being made and how people buy it for different reasons. And I think we use the example of a phone system and how different people in the company would use the phone system differently and look for different things when it comes to purchasing a phone system. It's the same. This is a great illustration of how that works out.
Right. And I think we do need to do that. I think we've always needed to do that. What they're saying here is don't leave it up to the individual salesperson. If you want this to happen, you've got to feed a lot of this information to the salesperson by sitting down and really going through a process that looks at the different decision makers or the different stakeholders, they call them, and then fill out a form that says, okay, what's interesting to them. And they want to avoid the question, what keeps you up at night? So we should know that as we go in.
Yeah, so true. And the layers of tailoring include the industry first, and then the company, then the role, and then the individual. And when it gets down to the individual, it's the individual's goals and how their performance is being measured and how the decision or change or solution would affect them personally. I think we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, let me read a paragraph here from page 111 in my book on reducing variability. It says, as you recall from chapter 2, two things Challenger reps tailor to are their knowledge of an individual stakeholder's value drivers and an understanding of the economic drivers of that person's business. A Challenger rep arrives at the customer with a deep understanding of how individual stakeholders fit into their overall business, what their role is, and what they are worried about, as well as the specific quantifiable results that those individuals want to achieve. What that all means to me, and I'm sure that in your training you've tried to help people understand this, you can't just go get the appointment and go. You've got to do some pre-approach, you've got to do some work, you've got to understand the industry, the company, and the individual people that you're going to talk to.
Mm-hmm. And have plenty of application third-party stories as to how your solution has been applied, how it worked, what the outcome is, what people can expect when they end up making a change, and the process of implementing, so that when we're going through a purchase and a timeline and a process of implementing it, we're talking with somebody that's seasoned, that's experienced, is going to be able to avoid sort of the kink in the hose when something ends up falling down or breaking down when it comes to implementing, because it just always seems like there's a problem with implementing. And you can ask a prospect that going, have you ever bought something, implemented it, and had it gone perfect? And they'll probably say, no, I can't remember that ever happening. And that's what we want to avoid. So let's talk about some of the things that we need to make sure that are done ahead of time so that when it is pulled off, then there are no kinks in the hose and it runs perfectly.
Yeah, and I think that makes a good conversation. And I do think it's important to go in there with an idea of what these drivers are. But I think it's a really big mistake to think we know everything because we as a company sat down and filled out one of these forms about what the value drivers are. And I don't know why they continue in this book to ignore questioning as part of the process. It seems they just put so much stake in their own smarts that I know what we're tailoring to. And I think you can make a good guess, but you still don't know for that particular individual. And you've got to probe using this form or using these value drivers that you've thought through as a guide, but not as gospel. And I think it's a big mistake to think that you know it all when you walk into a company just because you did some research. I would never presume that I know more about your business than you do.
Right. That's a very good assessment of the book. And I don't think any one book is the ultimate guide of how everybody should sell, and that there's no other book that has an influence, because I think we all have to have different books and get a overall rounded education and practices when it comes to selling. So I can see your point, Bill.
Yeah. The interesting thing is they finally get around to it on the last page of the chapter. I can't find it right now, but they do say, and this is really where you have a conversation with them about whether these are the value drivers, and they have that extra form that they fill out. They used an example, but I did like this form that they have on page 117. And what they do is ask you to fill out these value drivers with the customer as a preparation for talking to the decision maker. So you're filling out these value drivers with the stakeholders as a process then that you can take to the decision maker and say, okay, we've made these agreements with all your stakeholders. These are the things that we're going to make sure that we honor, and they've signed off on this. And I think that's not a bad idea, because it looks very organized then for that decision maker that you've pulled all this information together, and gives them a very valuable tool.
Yeah, very good point. We're curious what our listeners' experiences are with the Challenger sale, how you feel about the book, some of the challenges that come in implementing what's in the book, and maybe some things that are not included that you're experiencing when it comes to your role in sales. So let us know. Go to getinthedoorpodcast.com and send us your emails and your feedback. Bill and I would love to hear what your experience is. This segment of Get in the Door podcast is brought to you by The Art of Prospecting, your guide to getting in the door, by Steve Kloida.
Steve Kloida was known internationally for increasing salespeople's ability to make solid appointments with qualified prospects. You too can learn this essential skill by ordering a copy of his superb book, The Art of Prospecting, your guide to getting in the door. In this book, Steve shares the top strategies and tactics he has developed, implemented, and personally tested with more than 1 million sales and prospecting calls. You can get his book on the website, theprospectingexpert.com. In addition, check out his other great online resources. Instant Sales Coaching, which will guide you through 5 online success modules. A guided prospecting process entitled Call Reluctance Transformer, and the Magnetic Selling Strategies Workbook, a detailed step-by-step guide to increasing your sales. Get any of these valuable resources at theprospectingexpert.com.
Our topic today is believing works when you're involved in the believing. And I think this is a really important topic, Bill, and this is one area that I concentrate a lot on when it comes to working with the companies, because I think so often sales training is focused on sales knowledge, it's focused on sales techniques, sales skills. But if a salesperson doesn't believe that they will work, or the salesperson doesn't believe that they deserve a better life, or the salesperson doesn't believe that they deserve better results, they're not going to apply anything. So nothing is going to change. I always think that when we can't get through a conceptual barrier, no matter what we know, we won't apply it. So we will never get into a situation where we learn something in a classroom, in a training center, or during a workshop or a conference. Then we go out into the field. If we don't believe it'll work, we won't apply it.
Well, I think belief is one important part of the application. We do limit ourselves, though, in our value. We limit ourselves in our capacity. We limit ourselves in what we deserve, as you say. And a lot of that can come from our upbringing. You know, if our parents never made more than $40,000 or $50,000 a year, well, we may find it hard to believe that we can make 60 or 70.
Right.
Right. And so we put this limit on ourselves. If we've never sold $100,000 a month before, then it'll be very hard for us to believe that we can sell $100,000 a month. So what is it that can break us through those beliefs?
Well, first of all, we need to be conscious of it. I think in some previous podcasts, we talk about the difference between knowing what to do and then doing what we know.
Mm-hmm.
Now we need to be able to understand what's holding us back from doing what we know. And sometimes it's a conceptual barrier, it's a belief barrier, it's an experience that we had that's summarized by a memory. That memory then defines a belief. That belief.
Yeah, we talked about that in the fear last week, right?
Yeah,
So
we did.
Most of that can be fear. That
Right.
I'm afraid to try it this way. I'm afraid to ask this question. You talk about being afraid to ask about money.
Right. And it's a belief. They have a belief that it's not polite to talk about money. Well, then how does that reflect in your behavior? Well, we don't talk about money. So then what happens? Well, guess what our number one objection is? It's price. It's money. It's, it costs too much. The price is too high, something like that.
And that's because we never talked about it. So it comes out as an objection at the end rather than something we've dealt with earlier on.
Exactly. So we need to be able to really commit to a supportive belief system that is going to then create productive habits, which are going to be giving us the desired outcomes on it. So some of the things that we have to keep in mind is if we don't believe it, no one else will. If we don't buy it, no one else is going to buy it. If we don't buy it, we can't sell it. And another thing I think I've mentioned in the past is that how we buy, how salespeople buy, is how we naturally sell. Is that real? Yes. Is it true? No, it's not true. People buy for different reasons and they buy through a different process. Your goal is to lead them through a process of making a purchase that they will enjoy, and it'll be a pleasurable experience because people love to buy, but they hate to be sold.
Yeah, I think that quite often we make the mistake in sales of thinking that everyone thinks like we do.
Right.
So if we're a value buyer, we think everyone's a value buyer. If we're a price buyer, we think everyone buys on price. Mm-hmm. And we make the mistake of not finding out, as we talked about in the book, what their value drivers are. What is it that causes you to make a decision? What's the most important part of this decision-making process for you? That's the value driver. That's their belief.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And our goal is to find that out. And that's why I think questioning is so important, because having a great conversation with somebody, you can't just say, hey, Larry, what's your value driver here? But through having a good conversation with them and building that trust that you like to talk about, they will reveal to us what's important to them. And then we can show how we're going to deliver that for them.
Mm-hmm. If you're in sales leadership, sales management, you spend a lot of time training salespeople. So now that's what to do, and then how to do it, and then when to do it. But if they don't do it, you need to ask the salesperson, do you believe that this is an effective practice? Do you think this is an effective technique? Do you believe that you deserve better results? Mm-hmm. And you might get that salesperson to become conscious of, well, no, I don't believe it'll work. I think I told a story some time ago about working with a salesperson that left monotone, boring voicemails. Why? Because they don't believe voicemails work, because they don't listen to voicemails. And it's like, well, right. I got it. You don't believe voicemails are effective, so you will not leave a effective voicemail because you don't think anybody will listen to it. And you think
that's right. It's so much is in our beliefs. I taught a course in public speaking to a group, and there was a technical guy in it, and we were doing a thing on trying to get excited, and we do poetry and try to really get them revved up and talking loudly and with more emotion. And this guy just wouldn't do it, and I kept pushing him. And finally, he says, "Technical people are supposed to be boring." And I said, "Matt, that's your problem. You really believe that that." There's more value in sounding boring. You sound more convincing. I said, you don't. And it was funny because 2 or 3 years later, he came up to me and he said, you know what? I got to tell you, you're right. He said, I finally started putting some energy into my presentations, and it really carried the day. So it was a belief system, right? And it came out in this moment of energy that he said, we're supposed to be boring. Not so true.
Right.
But that's your belief.
That's the expectation. And that's, what role they play. We're going to be talking about who we are and what we do on a future podcast. So some things to keep in mind when it comes to a process is you have a belief. Think about, why do you believe that? And find the foundation to it. See if you can remember the experience that you went through to define that belief. How long have you believed this? So how long has that belief been part of your reality? Mm-hmm. What made you believe it? Was there an experience that kind of defined that? And then what other options have you considered on the other side of believing it? So if there's a counterpoint, what are some of the other sides of it? And then can you communicate this belief in a convincing way? And if you can't, what do you need to learn in order to communicate convincingly this sort of belief? Because that's the role of salespeople, is working with a belief system to support a behavior to get a result. And that conversation is really working on collaborating, or in some cases, contradicting another person when it comes in to a conversation. So we're collaborating, corroborating, or contradicting when it comes to our
I think
beliefs.
quite often, and I know we've chatted about this before, but quite often I think the reason that any kind of training doesn't work is that management doesn't long-term push their people to try new things. Trying new things, whether it's in a sales process, a leadership, presenting, whatever that new thing is, it's difficult to overcome these beliefs that you talk about. And the only way I can learn a new belief is by trying something, I think, and seeing that it works, and then creating a new belief system around that because it's more valuable to me than my old belief system. And if a leader doesn't continue to check their people, are you trying this? What did you do? How did you sell differently? How did you lead differently? They're just going to waste their time throwing a bunch of new ideas at people and hoping that they do something different with them.
Right. Yeah. Finding out what was the outcome. What could you have done better or different? If you had a chance to do it over again, what would you change? And
absolutely.
really
failure is such a big part of the learning process and the change process. But yet for many of us, once we fail once, hey, I'm not going to try that again, right? I think Mark Twain said that a cat who's stepped on a hot stove lid will never step on a hot stove lid again, but it will never step on a cold one either. Meaning that we can learn too much from failure or something that happens to us, and it changes our belief system, but it's not a valuable change.
Yeah, that's a great example. Beliefs are really evident and grounded in two areas, religion and politics. And you can see how that belief system in either side, religion or politics, on either side of which way you vote or believe faith-wise, represents our actions. And it's, one area is, where do rights come from? Do rights come from God, or do rights come from government? And that's a belief system that people have, and their actions end up supporting that belief system. And I think
we were told, talking about belief system, we were told many times, don't discuss
politics and religion.
Politics,
yeah.
Right. The two most important things in your life, let's make sure we don't discuss them.
Well, I also think that they are the most personal, and if we want to get faith-based, the most sacred. To share who you are, what you believe, what your truth is with another person, I think is the greatest gift you can ever give anybody. Now, my family members don't always agree with that. To go, yeah, right. This, I want to hear your opinion again, huh? If that's your greatest gift,
family members are the worst because they, there's no barrier there to tell you. But I think whether it's about religion or politics or how you sell or how you lead or how you work with people, you need to have those difficult conversations to help people guide in a more productive direction, to help them develop new belief systems. You can never call it changing your belief systems because people don't want to change, but you can help them develop new belief systems through successful action.
I'll add one more thing. Beliefs are connected to emotions, and we have to be emotional about being fair. We have to have emotions about value and emotions about looking for opportunities. We can't just be emotional. We need to be emotional about what's important when it comes to a relationship and a conversation. And everybody is always looking for fairness. That's something that I think every prospect and every salesperson should strive for, is fairness. And to also look at value and then the opportunity to work together.
Let me close with my ideas with a thought from Ralph Waldo Emerson. He says, sow a thought and you reap an action. Sow an act and you reap a habit. Sow a habit and you reap a character. Sow a character and you reap a destiny. And I think the thought is the belief, right? Sow a thought. It starts with what happens in your mind. If you haven't read As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, I would advise you to go out and pick that up. It looks like you can read it in 15 minutes because of its size, but there's so much value in that about how you think and what you believe. I would just recommend doing that. But I like that Ralph Waldo Emerson quote as well. Sow a thought, you reap an action. Sow an act, you reap a habit. Sow a habit, you reap a character. Sow a character, and you reap a destiny.
Think and Grow Rich is another great book by Napoleon Hill, if you haven't read that one.
Yeah, that is good. Scott, what are some of the resources that you have?
Well, you've got an article that we'll have on the show notes at getinthedoorpodcast.com. And I've got the chapter 2 of my book, Taking Off into the Wind. I'll have chapter 2 on the title of today's show is Believing Works When You're Part of the Believing.
Very good. This segment has been brought to you by the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program, presented by the hosts of the Get in the Door podcast.
Business is heating up, and now is the time to get back on the selling track. While others wait for the market to improve, prospects and opportunities await you now. Perhaps you want to be more productive on your prospecting, or you'd like to increase your closing percentage. Maybe having meetings online is not as comfortable as being in person. Sales reps are telling us they need some honest accountability and skill development to rise above the competition. Whatever your reason, this is the perfect time to engage with an experienced sales coach. That is why the host of Get in the Door podcast, Professor Scott Plum and Bill Hellkamp, have developed the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program. For only $495, you can receive personal coaching from the same sales professionals you enjoy on this podcast. It all starts with a discussion to give us your insights into your specific goals, challenges, needs, and motivation. After your 1-hour online session to jumpstart your coaching process, you will receive 5 more half-hour individual coaching sessions to enable you to make improvements over time and create new habits. Most salespeople make their money back with just one sale. Go to getinthedoorpodcast.com to contact Bill or Scott about the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program. Do you believe you deserve better results? Now is the time to invest in yourself and invest in your future.
We're going to close today with our golden nugget. This is a quote from John Wooden, the famous basketball coach, the winningest NCAA basketball coach from California. Don't measure yourself by what you have accomplished, but by what you should have accomplished with your ability.
Yeah,
what do you think of that one?
Wooden is really great. I love stretch goals. They really provide what you're capable of doing. I remember when you did an exercise at a PSA meeting and you had a couple of people come up and draw a line on a piece of paper. And then you said, no, draw it higher. Yeah. And they ended up drawing it higher. And then you said, now go back and draw it even higher. And they went back and draw it higher. And you told them, and I don't remember if you told them to draw it the highest you can the first time or not.
Nope. But I just said, I always say draw as high as you can. And the fun one is I say, see if you can draw it higher than that other guy.
Yeah.
Right. And then somebody drew it high and they're stretching up on their tiptoes and getting the marker in their tips of their finger. And it really proves that we could do a little bit more than we thought we could. And just by the energy that we could give an order can get people to do more.
It was a fascinating exercise.
Yeah. I should do that one again.
Right. Yeah.
That's good. I use that one a lot. So
the information on today's show will be at the website, getinthedoorpodcast.com, for all this information in the show notes.
Next week, Chapter 7 of the Challenger Sale, Taking Control of the Sale. And our topic is building stronger client relationships. Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.